Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkanasa Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight, we're going to be talking about some strange deaths. But first, remember, Thursday, April 4th, there will be an open mic night where you can share your UFO sightings or just listen to others share theirs. The open mic night will be at the Edinburgh Auditorium, which is right behind City Hall on University Drive. The mic night will begin from 6 o'clock until 9 o'clock p.m. Friday, April 5th, there will be the UFO Festival right next door to the Edinburgh City Hall. Food and fun for the whole family, and it's free to attend as well. Then Saturday, April 6th, is the Edinburgh Out of This World UFO Conference. This is the third best UFO conference in the entire world. 118 Paseo del Prado, Edinburgh, Texas. You do not want to miss this year's lineup of speakers. I did a show on the Dyatlov Pass incident, December 17th, 2016. If you want to listen to it, you'll have to catch it on YouTube because the Podomatic archives, I had to remove a lot of shows in order to free up some space. I'm not independently wealthy yet, so I can't afford to be shelling out $500 a year just to store old shows. And check it out. Just type in Strange Things with Chris James Dyatlov Pass, and you'll find it. If I ever get rich, I'll create my own website, and then I'll have all the shows listed, but that hasn't happened yet either. Back in 1959, a group of hikers vanished from a mountain in Russia. This was a strange case that after 60 years is still unsolved. Well, here in the United States, we have a case of a group going missing that some are referring to as being the U.S. Dyatlov Pass incident. During his army service in West Germany in the early 1970s, Gary Mathias, a Yuba City native, managed to develop a drug problem. This was not all that unusual since a lot of folks were in the army despite their wishes to be somewhere else. When the army discovered his addiction, they diagnosed him as having schizophrenia, and they issued him a psychiatric discharge. Not the kind of thing you want to get out of the army with, but well, he got out. He returned to his parents' home in California, and he began treatment at a local mental health hospital. Well, he started out having problems keeping up with his treatment. He was nearly arrested for assault on 2 different occasions, and he would often suffer psychotic episodes that usually landed him in a local Veterans Administration hospital. In 1978, he was finally being treated as an outpatient. He was being given drugs, stelazine and cogatine, and he was considered by the psychiatrists to be one of their stellar success stories. Stelazine is an anxiety medication. Well, one of its side effects is anxiety. Cogatine is used for treating Parkinson's disease in combination with other medicines. It is also used to control tremors and stiffness of the muscles due to certain antipsychotic medications. Matthias supplemented his disability pay from the government by working in his stepfather's gardening business. When not at work, he began developing a close friendship with 4 other men that he had met while he was receiving treatment. They all had slight mental disabilities, and they all loved basketball. Bill Sterling was 29. He lived at home with his folks. At one time, he had worked at several locations, but his fellow workers would take advantage of him, so his parents decided to support him and keep him at home. Sterling was deeply religious, and he would spend hours at the library reading books, trying to decide or discover how he could get Jesus to enter the lives of the patients in the mental hospital. He and Matthias were closer to each other than any of the rest. Jack Hewitt was 24. He also lived at home with his folks. He was unable to hold a job for very long due to his mental state. Ted Weir was 32, also living at home, and he was dependent on his parents for income. Jack Madruga was 30 years old. He had the intellect of someone much younger. He also lived at home with his folks. These 5 men all lived in either Yuba City or nearby Marysville. They all lived with their parents, and their parents got to know each other because they wanted to know who their kids were hanging out with. The parents began to refer to these 5 as the boys. The 5 men's favorite leisure activity was sports. Their families said that when they got together, it was usually to play a game or at least to watch one. They played basketball together in a team they had named the Getaway Gators. No, correction, Gateway Gators. The team was sponsored by a local program for mentally handicapped people. On February 25th, the Gateway Gators were due to play their first game in a week-long tournament which was sponsored by the Special Olympics. The winners would get a free week-long vacation in Las Vegas. Try that again. Los Angeles. You don't want to send these folks to Las Vegas. Something weird would happen. The 5 men had prepared the night before. Some had gone so far as to lay out their uniforms and any equipment they thought they might need. Several of the men had asked their parents to wake them up on time in case they missed their alarms. The night before the big game, the Gators decided they were going to drive to Chico, a town about 50 miles away, and they're going to cheer on the UC Davis basketball team in an away game against Chico State. Madruga and Matthias were the only members of the team that had driver's licenses, so Madruga was going to drive the team in his 1969 Mercury Montego. The plan was to see the game and then head right back home so they could rest up for the big game the next day. They headed out dressed for the cool weather and a night of fun. After the Davis team won the game, the group got back in the Madruga's car and they drove a short distance from the Chico State campus to Bears Market in downtown Chico. They bought some snacks, sodas, cartons of milk for the drive home. The store was about to close for the evening, so the clerk remembered seeing the 5 men as they came into the shop. Being a bit mentally off, the 5 would have kind of stood out, especially in a small store at the end of the shift. The clerk later remembered them because she was a bit upset, thinking the men were lingering too long, making her stay past the end of her shift. She still had to go through the receipts and check the store before heading home. The 5 men paid for their snacks, walked out the door, and were never seen alive again. Their parents became worried when the men were late getting back home. They should have been there no later than midnight. By morning, the police received several calls from the 5 men's families. The thought on everyone's mind was the men had broken down somewhere along the road home, or they might have taken a wrong turn and gotten lost. The authorities notified the police along Route 70 to be on the lookout for a turquoise and white Montego. Police in Butte and Yuba counties began searching along the route the men took to Chico. They checked all of the out-of-way places the 5 might have stopped for whatever reason. Maybe a bathroom break or to catch a quick nap. There was no sign of the 5 men or the car. Clerks and attendants at stations and grocery stores were asked about whether they'd seen the 5 men. Police and sheriff's deputies drove along any back roads looking for them. A forest ranger at the Plumas National Forest contacted investigators saying that he had seen the turquoise and white Montego parked along Oroville-Quincy Road in the forest on February 25th. At the time of the sighting, it had not looked odd, since many residents often drove up there into the Sierra Nevada on winter weekends to go cross-country skiing on extensive trails throughout the woods. The sightseers would often park along the sides of the road to go hiking through the woods. Once the ranger read the missing persons bulletin, he recognized the car and he led the deputies to it on February 28th. The car didn't appear to have been stolen. It was just parked on the side of the road. Inside the car, the police found evidence suggesting the men had been in it from when they had stopped in Chico up until parking in the woods. There were wrappers and empty cartons and cans that the men had purchased in Chico. The police also found programs from the basketball game they had attended and a neatly folded road map of California. Finding the car raised more questions than it answered. Why was it parked 70 miles from Chico, far off any direct route to Yuba or Maryville? None of the men's families could think of any reason why they might have driven up a long and winding dirt road on a winter night deep into a high elevation and remote forest. None of the men had been wearing winter clothing since they had planned to spend the evening either in the car or a stadium. The men had all been excited about competing in the basketball game the next morning. They would have wanted to get home and rest for the coming game. Madruga's parents said he didn't like the cold weather and had never been up into the mountains. Sterling's father had once taken his son to the area near where the car was found on a fishing trip, but the younger man had not enjoyed it, and he remained home any time after that when his father took trips into the area for fishing or camping. Police could not figure out why the men had abandoned the car. They'd driven up the road until they reached 4,400 feet elevation. This is where the snow accumulated on the road. Just a short distance farther, the road had been closed due to snow making it hard to drive any further. The mountain roads were being closed down for the winter months. The car looked as if it had become stuck in a snowdrift, just some deep snow that had blown onto the road. There was evidence that the wheels had been spun attempting to get it out. The police noticed the snow was not all that deep. It wasn't too deep that 5 healthy young men could not have been able to push it out. It looked like one or two of them would have freed the vehicle easily. The doors were all unlocked, and one of the windows was rolled down. The keys were not in the ignition or anywhere in the car, suggesting that the car might have been abandoned because it had run out of gas or had other mechanical problems. Maybe the five had decided to hike back down the road to look for help. When the police managed to get the car fired up, it showed no signs of any problems, and there was still a quarter tank of gas. The police towed the car back to the station for more thorough examination. The Mercury's undercarriage had no dents, gouges, or even mud scrapes. Not even on its low-hanging muffler. There were no mud splashes up the side of the car that would have been there if the driver had gone at a normal rate of speed. The car had been driven a long distance up a mountain road with bumps, ruts, and broken pavement, and mud puddles. Either the driver had been extremely careful, or he was very familiar with the road. Madruga's family all said he was not in the least bit familiar with the mountain roads. They were also emphatic in saying he would never allow anyone else to drive his car. It was his, and he would drive it. The car being left unlocked and with one window rolled down was something he would never do. He was attached to his car, and he would never leave it like that. The police and the sheriff's department wanted to search the surrounding woods to see where the five men had gone, but a snowstorm came in and made working the woods impossible. It got so bad that these searchers nearly got lost just a short distance off the road. There was nothing anyone could do to try finding the missing men until the weather improved. In response to local media coverage of the case, police received some of the reports of the men on locations far from where the car had been left. People were calling in from all over the state of California as well as neighboring states, saying that they had seen the five men. Most of these reports could easily be dismissed. However, two of the reports stood out. Joseph Scones of Sacramento told police he had inadvertently wound up spending the night of February 24th and 5th near where the Montego was found. He decided to take a drive up the mountain where he had a cabin in the woods. He wanted to check the snowfall to see if it was sufficient for cross-country skiing. He was driving up the mountain at about 5:30 p.m. He was maybe 150 feet up the road when he got stuck in a snowdrift across the road. After trying to get his car unstuck, he began to feel very unwell. He became short of breath and his chest felt tight. Thinking this might be a heart attack, he got back in his car and he tried to relax and stay warm. Around 6 hours later, he said he was laying across the seat trying to stay warm and not think about his chest pain when he saw headlights coming up from behind him. Hoping to get the car behind him to help get his car unstuck or at least give him a ride into town, Joseph rolled down the window and he leaned out. He could see a vehicle parked on the side of the road. It was a ways behind him. He saw there was a group of people standing around the vehicle. One of these folks looked like a woman holding a child in her arms. As he sat there wondering what was going on, he spotted some flashlights around where the other car was parked. He tried yelling from where he was to get them to come forward to him, but they either didn't hear him or they were ignoring him. He said, when he yelled back to the group, someone turned the car headlights off, and then all the flashlights were extinguished. Later, Scones said he thought maybe a pickup had pulled in a little closer behind his vehicle, maybe 20 feet from his back bumper. He wasn't too sure because his chest pain was causing him to feel delirious. After a few minutes, the pickup drove on down the road. Sometime in the early morning hours, Schoen's car ran out of gas. It got cold fast. He considered which would be worse, staying in the car and freezing to death, or trying to walk up the road to a lodge he knew about and maybe dying from a heart attack. Well, Scones set out on foot, trying for the lodge. He managed to walk to the place, and he knocked on the door. It was early in the morning, but the owner let him in and then agreed to drive him into town. As they were driving down the mountain road, they passed Scones' car, and then they saw a turquoise and white Montego parked a ways behind it. Once in town, Scones went to see his doctor and was told he had indeed had a heart attack. It was mild, but it was still a heart attack. When he heard about the missing men, he reported what he'd seen to the authorities. Ted Weir's mother said he was not the kind of person that would ignore anyone asking for help. She recalled how he and Sterling had helped someone they knew get to the hospital after having an overdose on Valium. The report the police considered noteworthy came from a woman who worked at a store in a small hamlet of Brownsville, 30 miles from where the car had been abandoned. March 3rd, the woman saw one of the flyers that had been distributed with the men's pictures, and it was offering $1,250 reward for information about the location of the missing men. $250 apiece. Each of the families had pitched in. She told authorities on February 25th she had seen 4 of the men in the store she worked at. She said the men had been riding in a red pickup. The woman said she knew the men were not locals, and they had a wide-eyed look to them when they came into the store. 2 men came into the store while the other 2 stayed outside using the payphone. She identified the 2 men using the phone booth as Hewitt and Sterling. The owner of the store also said he'd seen the red pickup with 4 of the 5 men in it. The store owner told police that men whom he believed to be Weir and Hewitt came in and bought burritos, chocolate milk, and soft drinks. The 2 witnesses were considered to be credible, and their statements were added to the record. Weir's brother told the Los Angeles Times that it was unreasonable to believe his brother would be heading to Brownsville, knowing he was due to play a basketball game the very next day. In fact, it was the same day. His brother was very focused on any plans he had made and wouldn't do anything out of character. But he also said the description of his brother buying any kind of food and hanging out with Hewitt was exactly how his brother would act. Hewitt's brother said Jack hated using telephones, and it would fall to him to handle any phone calls for his brother. The actions of the men in the store was in line with how their families said they would have behaved. The police were at a standstill as to what might have happened. They checked every lead, but still could not find the 5 men. They could only wait until the snow melted to try searching the mountain. On June 4th, most of the higher elevation snow was melting. A group of motorcyclists rode up the mountain to stay at a trailer which was maintained by the Forest Service. The campsite was about 20 miles from where the Montego had been found. This was a straight line and not by any road. Once they arrived at the trailer, the bikers found one of the windows had been broken. As they pulled the front door open, the men were hit by the smell of decomposition. The bikers contacted the sheriff's office, and deputies were sent to the scene. Inside the trailer, the deputies found the badly decomposed body of Ted Weir. The searchers returned to Plumas and began following the road between the trailer and the site of the Montego, looking for any sign of the other four. The following day, searchers found the remains of two men on the other side of the road, 11 miles from where the car had been found. The bodies were identified as being Madruga and Sterling. The two bodies had been partially consumed by scavenging animals. Autopsies showed they had both died of hypothermia. Deputies speculated one of the men had stopped walking and the other man had refused to leave him. They both lay in the bushes till the cold got them. 2 days later, Jack Hewitt's father found his son's body under a manzanita bush 2 miles northeast of the trailer. His shoes and his jeans were found nearby. These helped to identify the body. It is common for people dying from exposure to perform what is known as paradoxical undressing. As the body freezes, the blood is shunted to the core to maintain an inner heat. This rush of blood to the core will cause the body's temperature to increase, which leads the victim to feel warm. This leads to taking off of clothing. Jack's death was attributed to hypothermia as well. In an area about a quarter mile northwest of the trailer, searchers found 3 Forest Service blankets and a rusted flashlight by the side of the road. It could not be determined how long these items had been there or whether or not these items had anything to do with the 5 men. Gary Mathias was the only one still not accounted for. He would have run out of his medication shortly after the 5 had been stranded. This might have led to him becoming despondent. His description was sent out to all hospitals and jails in the area. Ted Weir, the body found in the trailer, had 8 sheets wrapped around him, probably in an effort to stay warm. The autopsy showed that he had died of a combination of starvation and hypothermia. He'd lost nearly half of his 200 pounds in body mass. The growth of his beard suggested he had lived as long as 13 weeks from when he had last shaved. His feet were badly frostbitten, and his shoes were nowhere to be found. On a table next to the bed were some of his personal effects, including his wallet, a nickel ring with Ted engraved on it, a gold necklace that he always wore. Also on the table was a gold watch, missing its crystal that the Weir family said was not his. There was also a partially melted candle. What the investigators found most puzzling, I absolutely hate this phone. Why did I put it on my desk next to my microphone? I don't know, but I keep threatening to remove it. Okay. What investigators found most puzzling was how Weir had come to his fate. The fireplace in the trailer had not been utilized, even though there was plenty of fuel to sustain a fire for some time. The trailer had heavy forestry clothing, which could have kept Ted and the rest of the men warm, but it all remained where it had been stored. Right next to the trailer was a storage shed that held emergency food. A dozen sea ration cans had been opened and their contents consumed, but an even greater assortment of dehydrated food had not been touched. There was enough food to have kept the 5 men alive for almost a year. Also in the shed was a butane tank and a burner that could have been used to keep them warm for several weeks. It seems as if Weir had not been alone in the trailer. Matthias and possibly Hewitt had been there with him. Matthias's tennis shoes were in the trailer, and the sea rations had been opened using a P-38 can opener, which Matthias would have learned how to use in his time in the Army. If you don't know what a P-38 is, it's a little folding can opener that most men would carry around their neck on their dog tags. A little hook-shaped item would fold out from the side and you'd insert it into the can, and then you'd twist your wrist 38 times to pry open the can lid. A lot of work to get into a can. But when you're hungry, you use what you've got. The deputies theorized Matthias may have taken Ted's shoes if his feet had swollen enough to make his own shoes too tight. This combined with the number of sheets wrapped around Ted's body, as if someone had taken the time to try helping him stay warm. Even knowing that 4 of the 5 men had died in the Sierras, investigators still could not completely explain what had led to their deaths. They still had found no explanation for why the men were so far from where they were supposed to be. The authorities learned that Matthias did have a friend in a small town of Forbstown, and they believed it was possible that in an attempt to visit him on the way back home, the men had turned a wrong road and wound up on Oroville that put them on the mountain road. This was just speculation, having no evidence to back it up. Then there was the odd thing of the men walking so far through the woods until encountering the forestry trailer. When people become lost in the woods, they tend to walk in a circular manner, winding up close to where they began. Before the men went missing, a Forest Service snowcat had gone along the road, driving out to the trailer to clear the roof of snow. The authorities think that maybe, possibly, the 5 men had followed the snowcat tracks through the woods to wind up at the trailer, but once again they had nothing to support this idea. The snow had covered the snowcat tracks, so they didn't know if the men could have followed them or not. Why the men had driven up the mountain when they all knew there was the big game the next day, no one can answer. Why they didn't follow the road back down the mountain instead of walking off the road away from the car is also a mystery. Did the 5 men ignore the calls for help from Shones? And if they did, why? And who was the woman that Shones think he saw with the men? To this day, Gary Matthias is still missing. He may have wandered away, lost inside his own delusions, suffering from schizophrenia, or he may have died somewhere out in the woods. All the families have, when thinking about the deaths of their sons, is questions. I'm going to take a brief pause here, play a couple of commercials, and drink some coffee and give my throat a slight rest. So don't go away. We'll be right back. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Did you hear a bump in the night and you think it just might be a ghost? Contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. That's the LPRS for all your otherworldly needs. Back in 1776, someone said, "Give me coffee or give me death." And if that's how you feel, you should be at the Organic Man Coffee Truck. They make coffee the right way, one delicious cup at a time. 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. Coffee, the stuff dreams are made of. Are you taking care of your skin, or are you going to wait and see how time treats you? Take care today by contacting Lourdes James, Independent Beauty Consultant, at 956-723-3019. Don't let time get the best of you. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back to the show. If you're wondering why during the show you hear the phone ring or the cats meow or the dog barks and I don't go through the effort of editing all that out, editing takes a lot of time, and I try my best to do a good job the first time around. Now, once in a while I do make mistakes, like when I called Telly Savalas Tony. I have no idea why. It's one of those things where you look at a word, you know what the word is, but your mind says something else, or maybe the connection between my brain and my mouth got slowed down. Mistakes happen. Like I said, I try to do the show the right way the first time. I don't want to spend half my life editing the show, trying to make it sound like I'm a professional radio spokesperson. So, that's why you'll hear the phone ring, you'll hear the dog bark. Once in a while you hear a cat messing with the mixer. I hate it when they do that, but they are cats. Morgan Donna Harrington was an attractive 20-year-old who was attending college at the Virginia Tech University in Blacksburg, Virginia. October 17th, 2009, Morgan and a few friends drove from Blacksburg to the University of Virginia in Clarksville, Virginia, to attend a Metallica concert. While the opening band was performing, Morgan decided to go to the restroom, figuring it was better to miss the opening act than her favorite band, Metallica. She was never seen alive again. When Morgana didn't return, and then she missed the opening of the band she had come to see, her friends called her cell phone. Morgan explained that she had gone outside the building to use the bathroom, only to find that she couldn't get back into the auditorium. She said she had been told there was a no re-entry policy. This struck everyone as being odd because there were plenty of bathrooms inside the building, so why had Morgan stepped outside? Morgan told her friends to not worry, as she was going to get a ride back home. Well, thinking everything was okay, if a bit odd, her friends stayed for the concert. Witnesses saw Morgan outside the building and stated she did not appear to be with anyone, adding more mystery to who or what would have made her exit the arena entirely. She had come to see her favorite band, only to wander outside and then leave. The last confirmed sighting of Morgan showed her walking alongside the road, heading away from the concert. It looked as if she was hitchhiking. She was quite some distance from the concert by the last report. The next day, when Morgan was not in her room, her friends contacted the police. The investigation went on for weeks as searchers scoured the countryside looking for any witnesses or signs of Morgan. A farmer living several miles outside of Charlottesville discovered skeletal remains on the edge of his property. The nearest road was 2 miles away. The remains were examined, and it was confirmed to be those of Morgan Harrington. It appeared as if she'd been raped before her violent death. The police searched for clues as to why Morgan had decided to exit the auditorium to use the bathroom when there were plenty of facilities inside the building, or why she decided to leave before seeing the main band perform. They could find no reason for her leaving without her friends. There were no clues as to how she wound up so far from the road, or who had killed her. No evidence has surfaced pointing to Morgan's final moments and what made her leave the arena. No one has ever been charged with her murder. The Cecil was constructed in 1924 by a man named William Banks Hanner as a destination for business travelers and tourists. Designed by Loy Smith in the Beaux Arts style, the hotel cost $1 million to complete, and it boasted an opulent marble lobby with stained glass windows, potted palms, and alabaster statuary. Hanner had invested considerable amount of money in this enterprise, knowing that several similar hotels had been established elsewhere downtown. Unfortunately, within 5 years of its opening, the United States sank into the Great Depression. The building slowly managed to deteriorate, only staying afloat. By 1940s, the years began to show as the hotel slipped into decline. The nearby area around the hotel was known as Skid Row because it was increasingly being populated with transits, drug users, and alcoholics. Ever wonder why they called it Skid Row? Way back during logging operations, the towns would pop up to house the workers and feed them. If you had the money, you could get a house on the edge of town, away from all the logging activity. Logs would be drugged through town using a wide area known as a skid. The closer to the place where the logs were being drugged, the lower the rent. The lowest income families all lived right along the Skid Row. And that's why they call it Skid Row today. There were about 10,000 homeless people living within a 4-mile radius of the Cecil Hotel. And since no one wanted to stay in such a location, the hotel began to house transients and drug users. As the Cecil Hotel began to decline more and more, suicides and other violent deaths on the premises became more frequent. The first documented suicide at the Cecil was reported in 1931 when a guest named W.K. Norton died in his room after taking poison capsules. In addition to suicide, the Cecil's history included other forms of violence and just plain bad behavior. It became a notorious rendezvous spot for adulterous couples, drug activity, and prostitution. You could say people would check in, but never check out. 1947, Elizabeth Short, dubbed by the media as the Black Dahlia, was spotted drinking at the Cecil Bar in the days just before her notorious and unsolved murder. Through the 40s and 50s, more suicides at the Cecil occurred. By the 1960s, longtime residents had become to refer to the Cecil as the Suicide. 1964, a retired telephone operator named Pigeon Goldie Osgood, who had been well known and well liked, and she was a long-term resident at the hotel, was found dead in her room. She'd been raped, stabbed, and beaten, and her room was ransacked. A man named Jacques Ellinger was charged with Osgood's murder, but he was cleared. Her death also remains unsolved. Perhaps most infamously, in the 1980s, the hotel was the residence of the serial killer Richard Ramirez, who was nicknamed the Night Stalker. Ramirez had been a regular presence on the Skid Row area of Los Angeles. According to a hotel clerk who had spoken to him, Ramirez had stayed at the Cecil for a few weeks. Ramirez may have engaged in part of his killing spree while staying there. Another serial killer, Austrian Jack Unterweger, stayed at the Cecil in 1991, possibly as an homage to Ramirez. While there, he strangled and killed at least 3 prostitutes, for which he was convicted in Austria. He hanged himself shortly after his conviction. In 2007, a portion of the hotel was refurbished, making it less of a flophouse. This was undertaken by the new owners. In 2011, the Cecil Hotel was rebranded as the Stay on Main, trying to attract tourists wanting to visit the older parts of town. The hotel became a focus of renowned attention when the surveillance footage of a young Canadian student named Elisa Lam began behaving erratically in the hotel's elevator. The video depicts Lam repeatedly pushing the elevator buttons, walking in and out of the elevator, and possibly attempting to hide from someone. It was recorded shortly before her disappearance. Elisa, or Lisa Lam, was the daughter of immigrants from Hong Kong who had opened a restaurant in Burnaby, just outside of Vancouver, Canada. In mid-2010, Lisa began a blog named Ether Fields on Blogspot. Over the next 2 years, she posted pictures of models in fashionable clothing and accounts of her life, particularly her struggles with mental illness. In January 2012's blog post, Lam lamented that a relapse at the start of the current school term had forced her to drop several classes, leaving her feeling so utterly directionless and lost. She titled her post, "You're always haunted by the idea you're wasting your life," after a quotation from a novelist, Chuck Palahniuk. She used that quote as an epigraph for her blog. She worried that her transcript would look suspicious with so many withdrawals and that it would result in her being unable to continue her studies and attend graduate school. Lisa was a student at the University of British Columbia, although she was not registered to attend classes in 2013. It looked as if she was touring the West Coast, traveling by bus, and staying in economy lodgings. Lisa traveled alone on Amtrak and intercity buses. She visited the San Diego Zoo and posted photos taken there on social media. By January 26th, she'd arrived in Los Angeles. After 2 days, she checked into the Cecil Hotel near downtown Skid Row. She was initially assigned a shared room on the hotel's 5th floor. However, her roommate complained about what she said would certain odd behavior, and she requested the room be a single occupant for a while. Lamb had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression. She had been prescribed 4 medications in order to treat her disorder. According to her family, she had no history of suicidal ideas or attempts. There was no report that claimed she had previously gone missing for brief periods of time, but this was never substantiated. Lamb contacted her parents in British Columbia every day while traveling. January 31st, 2013, the day she was scheduled to check out of the Cecil and leave for Santa Cruz, they did not hear from her, and they called the Los Angeles police. Later, her family flew to Los Angeles to help with the search. Hotel staff who saw her that day said she was alone. Outside the hotel, Katie Orphan, manager of a nearby bookstore, was the only person who recalled seeing Lamb that day. As she was outgoing, very lively, and very friendly. Lisa was getting gifts to take home to her family, Orphan told the news. As she was talking about what books she should get and whether or not what she was getting would be too heavy for her to carry around as she traveled, Orphan added. Police searched the hotel to the extent that they legally could. They searched Lamb's room, and they had dogs go through the building, including the rooftop. But the canines were unsuccessful in detecting her scent. Why didn't they search every room? The Sergeant Rudy Lopez said later, "We could only do that if we had probable cause to believe a crime had been committed." The suspicion is when you think something has happened, like someone is missing. A probable cause is a requirement found in the Fourth Amendment that must be met before police make an arrest, conduct a search, or receive a warrant. The courts usually find probable cause when there is reasonable basis to believe that a crime may have been committed, or when evidence of the crime is present in the place to be searched. Say you find blood on the floor or a knife. That is probable cause. On February 6th, the week after Lamb had last been seen, the LAPD decided more help would be needed. Flyers with her image were posted in the neighborhood and online. It brought the case public attention through the media. That February, the LAPD released elevator surveillance footage of Lamb before her disappearance. The footage shows Lamb behaving strangely in the elevator. You can watch it by searching Lisa Lam on YouTube. It is very weird behavior. She appears to be talking to invisible people. She keeps peering around the corner of the door, and then she hides in the corner. She opens and closes the door several times. But what exactly is going on in this video raises more questions than answers. Theories range from psychotic episode to demonic possession to maybe an unknown assailant just outside the camera's view. Guests began to complain. The shower was awful, said Sabina Bao, who spent 8 days there during the investigation. When you turned the tap on, the water was coming out black at first, and then it would get normal. The tap water tasted horrible, Bo said. It had a very funny, sweet, disgusting taste. Very strange taste. I can barely describe it. We never thought anything of it, she said. We thought it was just the way it was here. The morning of February 19th, a hotel employee climbed to the roof, and he had to use a ladder to investigate the hotel's water storage tanks. That's where the authorities found the decomposing body of Lam, whose personal items were all found nearby. After the autopsy, her death was labeled accidental. The tank had a metal latch that could be opened, but authorities said access to the roof was secured, and there was an alarm and locks. February 21st, the Los Angeles Coroner's Office issued a finding of accidental drowning with bipolar disorder as a significant factor. Lam's body was moderately decomposed and bloated. It was mostly greenish, with some marbling evident on the abdomen and the skin, and there was separation evident. That's when parts of the body start to detach from the rest of it. The toxicology tests were incomplete because there was not enough of her blood available for testing. There was a very small quantity of alcohol discovered, but no other drugs were found. She did show evidence of using her prescription medication. The investigation had determined how Lam died, but they didn't offer an explanation as to how she got into the tank in the first place. The doors and the stairs that accessed the hotel roof were all locked, with only the staff having the passcodes and the keys, and any attempt to force them would have supposedly triggered an alarm. The hotel's fire escape could have allowed her to bypass these security measures if she had known to go that way, or if someone had possibly pointed it out to her. A video made by a Chinese user from Lam's death and posted on the internet showed that the hotel's roof was easily accessible via the fire escape and that 2 of the lids of the water tank were open. The lids had probably been opened during the recovery. In a situation like that, the police wouldn't just look in one tank. There may have been more than one body, so they would have checked all the tanks, and they may not have put the lids back on. Apart from the question of how she got on the roof, others asked if she could have gotten into the tank by herself. All 4 tanks are 4-foot by 8-foot cylinders, propped up on concrete blocks, and there's no fixed access to them. Hotel workers had to bring a ladder up to the roof in order to look into the water. The tanks are protected by heavy lids that would be difficult to replace from the inside. Lisa would not have been able to climb in and then put the lid back in place. Police dogs that searched through the hotel room for Lamb, even onto the roof shortly after her disappearance, hadn't noted anything. Have you ever worked with a dog? They pick up on the smallest scent trail in the air. We had several scent dogs that I worked around when I was in the Border Patrol, and those suckers, you could not fool them. Theories about Lamb's behavior in the elevator video did not stop with her death. Some argued that she was attempting to hide from a pursuer, perhaps someone who was actually responsible for her death, while others said she was merely frustrated that the elevator appeared malfunctioned. If you watch the video, Lisa seems to be focused on something or someone just outside the elevator. Some proponents of the theory that she was under the influence of illicit drugs are not dissuaded by their absence from the toxicology screen, suggesting that they may have broken down during the period of time her body decomposed in the tank, or that she may have taken a rare cocktail of such drugs that a normal screen would not detect. The autopsy report and its conclusions have also been questioned. For instance, it does not say what the result of the rape kit or the fingernail kit were, or even if they were processed. Other evidence was written off as being a part of the body's decomposing. The coroner's pathologist appeared to be ambivalent about their conclusion that Lamb's death was accidental. One page of the report has a form with boxes to be checked as to whether the death was accidental, natural homicide, or suicide, or undetermined, in large type and a sufficient distance from each other. The accident box is dated June 15th. However, 3 days later, the undetermined box was checked instead. This was at some point in the 3 days before the report's release, noticed as an error and crossed out and initialed. Since her death, her Tumblr blog was updated, presumably through Tumblr's Quay option, which allows posts to automatically publish themselves when the user away. Her phone was never found, either with her body or in the hotel room. It has been assumed to have been stolen at some time after her death. Whether the continued updates to her blog were facilitated by the theft of her phone or the work of a hacker or through the Quay is not known, nor is it known whether the updates are related to her death. About halfway through the video, Lisa steps out of the elevator and waves her hands around as if touching some unseen object. She's constantly looking left and right and then hiding in the corner of the cab. Why does the elevator door open and then close for no known reason? I wonder what she was seeing that the rest of us couldn't. Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, Ted Weir, and Jack Mandruga allowed their fellow teammate Gary Mathias to drive them deep into the mountains to die. And where is Gary Mathias today? They could have survived for nearly a year with the gear in that forestry trailer, yet they all died from exposure or starvation. Why did Gary choose to walk away from the others? What motivated Morgan Harrington to step outside the arena, missing her favorite band? And who drove her out to that desolate farm where she was killed? She began acting in what has been described as bizarre manner shortly after arriving at the concert. What was Lisa Lamb hiding from? Was there someone or something there just outside the elevator? I've seen that video several times, and each time it left me with nothing but questions. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell your friends. If not, let me know what needs working on. Sometimes I'll even listen to suggestions. Don't forget the Edinburgh UFO Conference is April 5th and 6th. The open mic is April 4th. The festival is at the Edinburgh City Hall, and the conference is at the Edinburgh Conference Centre at Renaissance. You can go to roswellbooks.com/Edinburgh for more details. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say murder 3? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.